Now, often the world of employer branding can feel a little bit samey. And looking at organizations and their employer branding programs, sometimes it's hard to find that true differentiation that really helps them find the right people to join their organizations and ultimately impact on the bottom line. In a world where authenticity is talked about so much, having an employer brand that is differentiating is of course really important. So when I saw a few months ago a podcast called Employer Bland, I just had to get the host and producer Chris Murdoch on the podcast with me today. How you doing, Chris?
Really good, thanks, Chris. Thanks for inviting me on. It's great to be here with you.
Good. Well, yeah, brilliant. It's the sun is shining. It's Friday, and weekend is nearly upon us. But before we do that and finish off work, it's good to take a bit of a step back and have a chat about this kind of thing. Let's just dive straight into it, Chris. Let's tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah. So my name's Chris Murdoch. I'm the founder of a company called Voyse, so talent attraction software as a service. But prior to that, so if we kind of rewind to kind of my first job, really, this is going back, 16, 17 plus years ago, probably more, but I don't want to admit that. But
surely not, Chris. What are you talking about? Can't be that long.
But yeah, I kicked off my career in recruitment, and it was on the agency, on the technology agency side of things, and worked with a great company called Provide for about 5 or so years. Then embarked on my own career, set up my own agency, doing the same thing. So I've kind of always loosely worked in this space. Although I'm working in software now, it's still recruitment technology. So still kind of loosely in the place that I was in many moons ago. But yeah, it was kind of my passion for. I did have a real passion for tech startups and particularly, and they were, I was working with a lot of tech startups and helping those guys kind of figure out who they were from an employer brand standpoint. It wasn't really called employer branding back then, or if it was, it certainly wasn't something that was heavily bandied around, but it was more about
absolutely
helping those types of companies really discover who they are, what their value proposition is, why are they different, why would a DevOps engineer in Gloucester want to potentially work for that particular company. And it was trying to figure out what those unique components were and how they could be communicated to the kind of talent markets. And it was that kind of interest and intrigue and trying to find slightly better ways of doing that kind of took me into the kind of world I'm in today with Voyse. And that's, some of the challenges that we help companies overcome in Voyse, so yeah, that's my in a nutshell kind of career today.
Good man. And you so along with all the other things you're doing, you're running a company, and you decided to launch a podcast. You got some really great episodes on there, and it's and you got some more coming up soon as well, and happy to drop this one in there as well if you wanted to use it, for sure. But yeah, so it's great looking at the episodes you have, and is that why was it? Why did you set up Employer Bland podcast?
Yeah, I think for me the podcast is a real passion project, and I found the most interesting part, and I think still today, the most interesting part of my role is having conversations with different people from different walks of life that have got a slightly different perspective on topics I'm interested in. And I found myself probably similar to you do, Chris, in the work that you do, but, speaking to lots of people like this, one day it might have been, somebody that's talking about high performance culture. The next day, or week or whatever it might be, someone that's talking about, the journey they went on to create, really inclusive, workforce culture or whatever it may be, and tons of different topics in between those things. But I think the most interesting part of my job was always talking to people like that and listening to their story and, understanding, and quite often not always agreeing on points of view as well, but then having those conversations about, okay, but you think that, but what about if you look at it from this kind of standpoint, and having those really healthy conversations. And then it kind of, the whole podcast thing, I was watching, episodes. I've been watching yours for a long time, as you know, as well. I'm a huge fan
Good man. Thank you.
of your podcast. And I was kind of thinking, a lot of these conversations I'm having, they might be quite useful actually, to other people, because I'm learning a lot from them. I'm speaking to some interesting people, and it really it was born from that point onwards, to be honest with you, Chris. And the first episode was a little bit of done on a wing and a prayer. Thought need to be consistent-ish with this, which I can still definitely get better at. By the way, I still haven't nailed that one. But yeah, in a nutshell, it was really the desire just to have interesting conversations with some cool people, and then it was thinking we should maybe record a few of these, and that's kind of what we've done.
Nice. I definitely get that as well. I like the natural vibe you get across in. It's very conversational, but lots of valuable stuff. Even like your episode around culture and the advice that is like, if you're starting up, actually try and get an HR person in as near to the beginning as possible, because founders don't necessarily understand people as much as the business and the product they're building. So there's a nice balance between kind of natural chat and some valuable advice. So it's great. It's great to see you doing it. Definitely, it's great to see you continuing it as well. You got some
really
episodes
appreciate
coming out
that.
soon.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Yeah, really appreciate that.
So let's dive back into the title Employer Bland. Why Employer Bland in particular?
I think for me, Chris, it was kind of as well, looking at my previous life in agency, working with lots and lots of different companies, all different shapes and sizes across lots and lots of different industries. I had quite good visibility of what these companies were doing to try to attract and engage, retain good talent. But there was just there just seemed to be a real vanilla state of employer branding that was, this almost like this one shoe fits all template that everyone was trying to adopt. It was, create a slightly flashy career site, embed a little bit of content that looks like A, B, C, and D. And most companies seem to follow that kind of, particular pattern, whether it's career stories, one day in the life, whatever. But again, quite a cut and paste approach, I felt anyway, to employer branding. One of the things that I've always had a huge bugbear with, it was one of my drivers for starting Voyse with my co-founder, was just the lack of job marketing and the blandness around marketing jobs, which for me, I think it's still one of the biggest opportunities companies have to communicate their employer brand and elements of their EVP and those types of things. And it's an opportunity missed for so many companies because there's a little bit of effort going into these cut and paste careers websites a lot of the time, but you still see so many of these, 4-page PDF documents just being flung out the door. And with a little bit of thought, there's so much fun that you could be having with that part of your process, certainly from an employer branding point of view. So I think long-winded answer to your question, but I just felt that there was a real vanilla state, and still is in many cases. Don't get me wrong, there are still, which you and I both know, there are some companies out there doing employer branding incredibly well. But in large, I just felt there was a real vanilla state and a real kind of a one shoe fits all approach to employer branding. So I was just keen to speak to different people that had some different views on that and how things could maybe be done a little bit differently.
I love that term, vanilla state. Definitely, it's absolutely. I think it's so important, isn't it? Because we had some green room chat about this, didn't we? About when it comes to B2C, when you're looking at product marketing, there's an element of you can build a product that is aspirational, and you can generate a lot of revenue from that. But there's no faking. There's no faking in employer brand and your employer branding content, and So it's even more important to make sure that actually you're looking beyond just the product, or in this case, the job. Yes, there are functional benefits, but those functional benefits and features are literally only one part of that brand. So actually to tap into the kind of non-vanilla content and experiences you can share with people is really, really important.
Yeah, it's a really, really good point. And I think your comparison with products and B2C marketing for products is a really good one, because I think, I think there can be, for a lot of companies, like this state of, well, that works for selling something, that works, and we're kind of selling something over here, so let's just adopt that template for this. But like you say, the funny thing about employer brand, it can lie, but it will bite you on the arse pretty quickly if it's not authentic, and you aren't entirely telling the truth about it. There are real people behind that, real stories, and there's real feedback to be given. I think in B2C with products, it's kind of a voiceless process a lot of the time, and it can be as aspirational as you want it to be, can't it, to a degree? Because there's no one's really going to tell you, apart from the odd kind of review you get here and there about what that product's actually like. There isn't a whole horde of people that sitting behind that can immediately kind of put a spotlight on it and say, no, that shouldn't be happening. So I think
that's very true.
Yeah, I think, but it's a really good comparison, because I think I still see that a lot, where it's this this transfer from corporate marketing, product marketing, and branding over to employer branding, where I just think, certainly from my experience, the work that needs to go into employer branding from a bedrock point of view to make sure that everything is fit for purpose, it's just so important that that's there, because if you try and execute things without that being there, it could be, making sure it's inclusive, make sure there's belonging, in the place, and whatever else. But I think without the bedrock, the foundational stuff, it's really difficult to get the employer branding part right.
Yeah, I like what you say about cost as well, because if you're looking at a product or service, what's the cost? The cost is there, make me a refund, or subscription is cancelled, or you have to refund a holiday, or your product gets returned, and you either give store credit or whatever. That's like relatively cheap cost to the business. Obviously, if it happens at scale, then that is a massive problem. But when it comes to, in this case, the product being that job and potentially a very impactful career or part of a career at a company, that's hugely expensive, isn't it? I mean, there's lots of stats bands around. Let's not dive into that, right now, because that's more than accessible to people. But God, even the psychological impact of a hiring manager getting someone in and then having to then find someone again, because either the person's not been right or that person's decided to leave. It's massively costly to a business, both motivationally and morally, and also from a bottom line impact as well.
Yeah, it's such a good point, Chris. And it's a complete false economy, isn't it? And we see it time and time again, where employer brand is used as this plaster to fix attraction. It's like, we need to grow, we need people, let's create this thing that's really shiny, really nice, that's going to be the magnet to pull people in. But if it's not fundamentally backed up with the truth and with everything that it says it is, like you say, there are stats everywhere. I'm sure people can go and kind of look at those for themselves, but there are stats everywhere that, I suppose, it's about retention, isn't it? If you're getting the attraction bit right and that engine is working, that's great. But the retention part of the process is arguably more important, isn't it? If people are coming in and they're not sticking, and you've got this conveyor belt situation going on, the costs can be astronomical, because no one's really getting up to speed, are they? They're not, people aren't, high performance, from day one. They're typically high performance from 6, 12, 18 months, onwards, and really adding to the culture and that type of thing from 6, 12 months onwards. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's, the cost of doing it badly or not doing it authentically is just crazy.
Yeah, I mean, the whole ROI thing is a separate conversation, and it's true ROI is a lot more difficult to find compared to kind of marketing return. To see someone actually contributing to the bottom line is important, but there is interesting work being done by Nick, who actually used to be at IBM, and Ben Phillips also used to be at IBM. Nick had spoken to Matt Alder on Matt's Recruiting Future podcast about return on investment and trying to connect spend with employer branding and talent marketing spend with the amount of time jobs aren't being filled and what that actually costs a business. So it's really encouraging to see that, and you'd hope that over the next few years, actually, that's being dived into a lot more, where ultimately investing in this space is seen as important, as even more important than the consumer space or the B2B space, because if you don't have your people, the right people, you don't have anything else. Even with the software business, if you don't have the right people, then it's not going to work. So
absolutely, yeah. Well, you're so right. The people are the business, aren't they? And the ROI conversation, Chris, I think is a really interesting one, because I've so many conversations with various people about this exact topic, and people's perspective, it really, for me anyway, it differs from person to person. I've had conversations with people, ROI for them, or their kind of North Star metric, the one thing that's really critical for them on a campaign, could just be awareness. It could be creating content, distributing that content, and making sure it's striking a chord with a particular demographic. They don't even care if that demographic's applying for jobs at that moment in time. They just want to make sure they're in the hearts and the minds of that particular demographic. And then you've got other people, and they're like, well, if it's not feeding me the applications I need immediately, it's not working. It's not returning me, the bang for buck. And I find it really interesting, actually, because I think with employer branding, it's got so many strings. I say so many, there's probably a finite number, but there are different strings to the bow, aren't there? And I do think, or I don't think, it's a one shoe fits all approach. I quite like the thought that North Star metric, that thing that's super important for that particular part of the business at that moment in time, could be really different to what's going on over here with this particular company, for example. But it's a really interesting topic, though. You could talk all day just on that particular thing, couldn't you?
But it's a very good point, actually. I think then that's about framing things in the right way, isn't it? Because as that strategy, isn't kind of David Angus, who's curated digital, used to work with him at Havas People, was actually recently on the podcast talking about kind of say strategy never sleeps, is ongoing, which is absolutely right, and it's there can be some immediate things that need to be done. What can we impact today? What can we impact tomorrow, next week, and next year? So I think you're absolutely right to talk about it in that way, for sure. So talked about employer brand. How'd you go from employer brand to true employer brand and true employer branding? You could say that, obviously, nuances in the terminology.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, I'll circle back to a topic I spoke about at the start when I was kind of, introducing myself and Voyse and, the work that I've been doing. But starting with job marketing, I think is a great place to start. And job marketing in one part of a business. So really what I'm saying there is, I think when you think of employer brand, it can be this just enormous beast that can just scare the life out of you.
Yeah,
I think
definitely.
that's the biggest problem for a lot of companies, and that's why it's like this cut and paste thing happens, um, because it's so big and it's this Mount Everest to climb, and it's like, oh well, let's just do something and put a plaster on it. Whereas I think there are some really cool things that you can do if you take things to a little bit of a micro level. And I know a lot of people listening might kind of think, yeah, that's not scalable. You know, we need a scalable employer brand, but it is scalable if you split test and you have fun, but do it on a micro level in one particular part of your business. Because I think the things that you can learn and the experiments that you can conduct and the findings you can kind of create, the data you can analyze, is so interesting. And then every time you're kind of introducing, you know, these kind of philosophies and these findings into a new part of your business, you're constantly improving and things are getting better. So, for example, you know, just to kind of be a little bit more specific about things, you know, if we look at like job marketing for, we work on various projects, but one that's kind of, you know, right in the front of my mind because we're doing it right now is early careers in an asset management business. And it's so different. You know, we've spent time, and they're spending time themselves doing workshops, and they're finally discovering they've got their own EVP in early careers in that particular part of their business. It's so different and so separate to every other part of their business. And they're getting their people involved. You know, they've created a kind of a workshop group of 10 people, which is a really small proportion, but there's a real diverse, you know, group within that focus group. And these people are really engaged to kind of helping them create content, coming up with ideas. They're creating content around, you know, there's personal stories. You know, there's people that went to school with like Rashford, Raheem Sterling in Wembley. One of the guys was talking about his going to school with Raheem and all these other things, completely separate to, you know, these stories that are coming through that are so separate and a million miles away from working in asset management. But you're listening to these stories, you know, there was a lady in there that, you know, didn't go to university, which is, you know, it's not actually that, you know, normally the path would be to get a great degree from university, go into this, you know, super high flying asset management firm. But, you know, she went on an apprenticeship. She grew up in this tiny little village in Scotland, and she was talking about her journey. But just talking, you know, at that micro level about that one small part of their business, you know, these people are contributing to ultimately what will be the employer brand for that, you know, micro employer brand for that part of the business. And I think that, you know, cooperating and engaging with the people, as opposed to thinking that the strategists and the consultants and the heads of and the, you know, employer brand leaders should have all the answers. I don't think they should have all the answers. You know, for me, the answers lie in the people and these people so often want to help. They want, you know, they're just waiting for you to ask them, you know, we want to recruit more people like you. Can you help us? They're like, yes, you know, I can, and I've got ideas, and, you know, and that type of thing. So it's a slightly long-winded answer, but I think it's quite a big topic. And it's, you know, for me, it's, you know, taking things to a micro level, you know, reducing the burden, you know, and putting some of that on other people, you know, not in a bad way, but just like, you know, can we do this together? Because I don't profess to having all the answers. You know, I don't profess to knowing exactly what people like you want to see in content. You know, I'm hoping you're going to kind of talk to me a little bit about that. And yeah, in my experience, you know, shaping the experience with those people, you know, for me has been a huge eye opener. And like helping, you know, carve, which they're doing themselves, we're kind of, you know, kind of stewards in the process, but helping them carve micro EVPs, you know, in siloed parts of the business has been a massive, massive help in, you know, really just understanding, you know, how employer brand needs to be communicated for these individual parts of a business.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's it's yeah, there's so much there. Absolutely, you're so right. I think, you know, it doesn't surprise me that, you know, you talk this way, given the amount of time you've been an entrepreneur in your career, you know, and this thing about testing and scaling is that absolutely the right thing to do. And I think experimentation and testing Although that's what strategy is about, testing the hypotheses. That's ultimately what it is. But I think there's big organizations get a bit worried about doing that, and things like experimentation and testing are seen as negative words.
Yeah.
But actually, I think you're absolutely right, because, if you're kind of starting at the source, and solving a particular challenge, a hiring manager's challenge, then you're building a business case to scale something up, aren't you? And you're testing a solid hypothesis, which is your strategy, right from the very beginning, and then it just grows from there, doesn't it? And instead of feeling you have to have the massive budgets to start, to do employer brand, although we know it already exists, can restrict organizations to actually just start. I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, exactly, Chris. And I think there's also this this real desire for companies to want to be perceived as hyper professional and super polished. Polished in regards to their culture, polished in regards to the content they're creating and whatever else. And I just find a huge irony in certainly for me and the people that I socialise with and speak to, the content that I consume is, it's not polished content. If you're looking through Instagram stories, I'm not on TikTok. I'm dad of 4. I'm not quite there yet. I'm sure I will be soon. But it's not polished content. It's done on the fly. It's authentic and it's engaging. It's kind of real, and we get it. I think we live in a world now where our BS detector on, is there this enormous kind of crew behind that is kind of guiding a lot of this, or is that super real and can I believe it? Our detectors are pretty good these days, I think, aren't they? Regards to kind of what we buy into and what we don't. And I think that's the
Absolutely.
other thing. It's not striving for excellence all the time, is embracing getting things wrong. Let's try something new. Let's try something that might not work. Let's try something a bit controversial. There might be a group of people in that particular part of the business that have got some challenges, not necessarily challenges with it's a horrible culture not working here, but it's look, things can be really tough, and they're not always great, and it's not always rosy, and this is kind of life for me at the moment. Let's tell the world about that. Let's tell people that are maybe looking to join this business about some of those challenges, and experiment with different types of content, and not necessarily always content that you think is going to make everybody's eyes light up. It might be content that make people kind of sit back and wow, I didn't realize that, but that's actually got me. That's struck a chord with me. Might not strike a chord with hundreds of other people, but it's those people that you do strike a chord with. I think that's where employer brand is it's really powerful. It's that one person amongst a group of 50. It's cool, I've seen a lot of stuff recently, but that's really kind of hit home for me. That resonates, and they're the people that 9 times out of 10, they're the people that you want, and they're the people you want to strike a chord.
Definitely. It's ultimately, over the years, you're looking at employer branding, employer marketing is about trying to place somebody in the shoes, in the world of what it's like to work in that place, and place them in the shoes of that individual, that employee. And there's nothing better than to actually make it feel like someone knows the people that they're going to be working with.
Yeah.
And I've even done it with recruiting, nursing assistant director roles, where it's actually, this is such a high level job. You want to actually capture conversations with the leadership team.
Yeah.
So that then actually that person who does apply knows not exactly, but has a very good feel for what it's like working with those people, and starts just vibing with somebody, and that's just rapport, isn't it? Ultimately, that's what it's all about.
On that point, I was just the cogs were spinning as you were talking there, Chris, and it's I think when you talk about the leadership content, I'm a massive advocate of that. I think it's great for so many different reasons. I think one of the reasons is it kind of, in my experience, it reduces application anxiety, which I think is a real thing a lot of the time. It's like, actually, okay, that's the person that I could be working for. And if it is right for you, it's like, actually, I feel a little bit more at ease now about this process. And I think in my experience as well, it's often helped people with that kind of pre-interview part of the process as well. So you've obviously got the attraction and engagement part that's really important. But further down the funnel, when people are kind of still in your kind of, engagement cycle of interviews, I think it's really helpful for people to keep them engaged in the process, but also like helping them prepare. If they can understand, even if it's a 1 minute snippet of who that manager is and who they might be working for, just listening to them and, maybe understanding a little bit about how they tick and that type of thing. It's just a nice thing to provide people, isn't it? To reduce anxiety, give them a bit more insight, and I suppose ultimately keeping them engaged in the process as well.
So totally. I think, you're absolutely spot on. I knew there was a reason why I wanted to get you on the podcast, Chris. It's been a good chat. I think, this could lead into another space, but I think let's just touch on it briefly. Is I think then when you layer on top of that, this thing about, in particular, job roles, when you have these people talking about, working there and talking about the kind of things that they do, then getting them to not talk thought leadership, because I can't stand that term, thought leadership. It's opinion. As thought leadership suggests, it's just, it's going to be the C-suite, top brass who share the thought leadership because they know what they're talking about, or it's the it's thought leadership coming from sales and marketing person, or the commercial director. Commercial director, come on, it's like, but not to say they don't have valid input to give, because they do. But my point is that people who, particularly great people in an organization, have opinion to share, very valid opinion to share, and so therefore you can actually, that's a great contribution to generating that rapport with someone who's not even looking for a job. And if they're talking about the sector that they're working in and talking about things that they're passionate about, they kind of forget that it's actually about promoting the organization as a place to work, and just talking. And to finish off on, I think there's what you talk about with kind of working very closely as early as possible with the individuals, the employees, saying, what do you think? That's co-production. And I think when you put it all together, you've then actually got something which is so much better than just, here's our employer branding kit. Again, there's a place for this, definitely, but here's the employer branding toolkit. Here's some assets. Can you share it, please? Compared to, you've actually produced something together.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that shared responsibility is often so welcomed as well, because, when you start owning, that micro, EVP, and you've got your own little employer brand almost amongst this bigger, obviously there's one employer brand, but let's face it, so many different ways to communicate that based on the different parts of the business. But I think people embrace that, and they understand they've got their own unique voice within this huge beast often of a business. They've got their own unique voice. And I think that's really important as well, isn't it? It's, knowing that you are being listened to, that voice is being heard. And, there are so many unique attributes that can be spoken about. And also you can get, have some friendly competition as well. So if you are creating, job adverts, for example, for, your one micro part of the business, their engagement, stats that you could be banding off against the completely different part over here. But the involvement you're all having and the involvement they're all having, there's some really nice friendly competition that's going on with, like, we've got so much more engagement, so many more, high quality applications over here, or whatever it is. But, giving people an opportunity to kind of be part of the process, I think, can be a super, super healthy thing to do.
Well, Chris, it's been great. Really enjoyed it. Well, looking forward to seeing the next few episodes come out on your Employer Brand podcast. And if anyone wants to check out Chris's podcast, then jump to the link somewhere near this video or near this audio episode and check it out. And definitely subscribe for sure.
Oh, thanks ever so much, Chris. It's been an absolute pleasure. I was honestly really excited when you reached out to invite me on. So really appreciate you getting me on. It's been great catching up.
Oh, cheers, Chris. Yeah, have a good rest of your Friday, and have a good weekend when you get there.
Yeah, you too. Thanks ever so much.
Cheers. Bye now.